Morning, everybody.
Morning.
Feels like a long time since I sat in this chair. It's been a couple of months since I've given a talk. So today we will take up the next gate in the 108 Gates of Dharma Illumination. Today we are on gate 76, which is, in this translation, right discrimination. So just quick review of where we are, because it's been a while since we've talked about this text. This 108 Gates of Dharma Illumination is found in the 11th fascicle of the 12th fascicle version of Dogen's Shobogenzo. It's mostly a long quote from another text called the Sutra of the Collected Past Deeds of the Buddha. So Dogen included this piece of text. He wrote a final paragraph recommending that we all investigate all of these gates. So Dogen did not himself write these 108 gates, they predate him, but clearly they were important. And the elements that are talked about in these 108 gates are important. He's written about many of these elements in other places, other parts of the Shobogenzo. So going through these 108 gates is a really good foundational study, if you will, right? Of some really important teachings in our tradition and some things that Dogen thought were important. So in this text, we've moved now into a section on the elements of the Eightfold Path as factors of awakening. So we're all familiar with the Eightfold Path. It's one of the first things that we encounter when we start practicing. So last time we took up right view, which was the first in the path, and today we're taking up the second one, which, as I say in this translation, is right discrimination. So our gate statement for today says, right discrimination is a gate of Dharma illumination, for with it we eliminate all discrimination and lack of discrimination. So it sounds a bit circular. We'll get there. Right? So right discrimination is a gate of Dharma illumination, for with it we eliminate all discrimination and lack of discrimination. So you may know this element as right thought or right intention. If right discrimination doesn't sound familiar, you may know it by some other name, like right thought or right intention. In a minute we'll get to why there are multiple interpretations of this gate, of this element. So in the Buddhist tradition, there is more than one kind of discrimination. There's the negative kind, that's based on limited view, where we pick and choose based on three poisons and our imaginations and our delusions and stories and preconceptions and like all that stuff. There's also the positive kind of discrimination, where we know right from wrong. We know wholesome from unwholesome, true teachings from false teachings, and all of that. So there's more than one way to look at this discrimination. So a couple of months ago, sitting here, I talked about, as I say, the gate related to the first element on the Eightfold Path, which was right view. So this second element, right discrimination, is connected with right view. And of course, we know all these elements of the Eightfold Path, in a way you can't pull them apart, right? They all arise together. So right view, right discrimination are connected. So a quick review of the first gate we talked, or sorry, the first element we talked about last time. Right view, in its broadest sense, right view is about anything that results in wholesome, skillful activity. Things that move us toward letting go of three poisons, things that move us toward experiencing awakening. All of that is right view, as opposed to mistaken views that just lead to suffering for ourselves and for other beings. So more specifically, traditionally, right view is a deep understanding of what Buddha taught about some important things, like cause and effect, or karma. You know, our actions have consequences. Three marks of existence, four noble truths, dependent origination, right? Some key things that Buddha taught. If we really deeply understand what Buddha taught, that's what right view is pointing us towards. So with right view, we see things clearly. With right discrimination, or right thought, or right intention, we choose some action to take based on that right view. So it moves us beyond, I just understand something, to I'm actually doing something about it. So when we have some insight into the nature of reality based on our experience of what Buddha's teaching, we practice a little while, right? We have some experience of what he's teaching in a very direct kind of personal way. Then probably we may reconsider the way we live. We may reconsider our values. We may reconsider how we make choices, how we make decisions, how we treat other people. We may aspire to live in a certain way and to act in a certain way based on our changing understanding, right? Based on our increasing depth of insight, perhaps, into what the Buddha was talking about. So intention connects what we perceive, what we understand, with what we actually do. So what we think, of course, drives what we say and do. There are three places or three ways we create karma, right? Body, speech, and mind. So, what we think tends to drive what we say and the actions that we take. So now we can see why this element is sometimes called right intention, right? We're connecting something I understand with what am I actually intending to do? How am I actually intending to live? What action am I taking? So we can see how discriminating between wholesome and unwholesome action is related. Thought, intention, discrimination, all kind of tied up together. So pick your word, right? They're all in there in some way. So Buddha says there are three aspects of right intention. And these have three parallel aspects of sort of mistaken intention, right? Or unwholesome intention. So while he was sitting under the Bodhi tree, before his awakening experience, he was watching his thoughts as he sat there. And he noticed that his thoughts fell into two categories. He was having two kinds of thoughts. They were either about desire, ill will, harmfulness, or they were about renunciation and goodwill and harmlessness. So you can kind of put these thoughts into two buckets, two categories. So when he noticed the first kind of suffering, the desire, ill will, harmfulness, he saw that it led to suffering for himself and suffering for other beings, and it obstructed the wisdom and compassion that were naturally arising. Really, these things were hindrances to the wisdom and compassion that were already arising. When he noticed the second kind of thoughts about the goodwill and the renunciation and the harmlessness, he saw that was beneficial. He saw it was helpful to cultivating wisdom and compassion, helpful to manifesting awakening. So he tried to let go of the first kind of thinking, the harmful kind, and he tried to cultivate or encourage, or at least get out of the way of, the second kind, the harmlessness kind, the wholesome kind. So if we're caught up in wrong views, we can set some unwholesome intentions, and we can take some unwholesome actions. So we see how these things are connected, right? If we hold right views, we set wholesome intentions. We take skillful actions that are beneficial to ourselves and to other beings. So all the unskillful action in the world, if we look at it carefully, starts with views and intentions, right? All the unskillful action that we take or that others take or that we see in the world starts someplace with views and intention. How do we physically manifest those views? What do we actually do with those things? So it doesn't arise from nothing. And the consequences of mistaken intention, mistaken view, can affect one person, or millions and millions of beings, right? So this can be very personal. How do I live my daily life? What's my experience of just walking through the world? And my goodness, they can also, these mistaken intentions, mistaken views, can also, as we know, affect, millions and millions of beings, whether that's, nations of people or animals or the planet or whatever, right? So, this is like really simple, very personal, very direct, and it's also huge. It's absolutely huge. So, whatever personal problems, whatever societal problems we're having, seems to start with what's happening here, right? So if we think we don't make a difference, if we think our practice doesn't make a difference, if we look at this teaching, we know it all starts here. So it's a manifestation of intention based on wisdom and compassion, or on the three poisons. Like, which bucket are our thoughts falling into? Which kind of thinking are we doing? Are we doing the wisdom and compassion kind of thinking? Or are we doing the three poisons kind of thinking? So we can see why cause and effect is such a central teaching for us. It just comes around and around and around. What we think and say and do has real consequences. So what's our intention? We can be we can pay some attention to that, right? So let's look briefly at these three kinds of intention that Buddha talks about. So the first is the intention of renunciation, which is simply countering desire. It's countering our greed and our clinging. So Buddha says, actually, this teaching runs contrary to the way of the world. He knows. He says right out, this is not the way the world typically works. This runs contrary to the way of the world. Usually people follow their desires. You know, we think that objects are going to make us happy. We're going to chase after stuff, and somehow, you know, we're going to be happier. We're going to be contented. If I could just get that thing, whether it's a physical thing, like if I could just get a better house or a power boat or, you know, more jewelry or something, or if it's something intangible, if I could just have more love, if people would just respect me, you know, whatever it is we're chasing after. So Buddha says we need to give up those desires because, simply, they cause suffering. So there's a difference between having direction in life. He's not saying don't have a direction, don't have a plan, don't have an aspiration. He's saying we need to give up this kind of thirsting, craving, clinging desire for stuff. Doesn't mean we shouldn't have things in our lives. It means what's our relationship with those things, right? What's our intention around those things? So Buddha's not saying we should give everything away and go live in a cave. And I think when we start to practice and we read some of these teachings, and lately it's come up again around Shobo Genzo's Wimonki and the way Dogen tells us to approach our practice, you know, we have to be careful how literally we take these things. Let's extract, you know, the important point there, which is we need to give up our craving and our clinging. We need to live in some way that's appropriate for our circumstances. If we have families, families need a place to live. You know, it'd be tough to move your family into a cave. So we need to have and use the things we need to have and use and live in a way which is appropriate for our circumstances, but we also need to recognize that getting out from under our craving and clinging and thirsting desire is tough. We need some diligence around that. We need some intention around that. We can't just kind of float through that. We have to look pretty carefully at what am I thinking, what am I saying, what am I doing, how do I intend to live, what's my aspiration for living, and am I carrying that out in the way that I would really want to? Or are there some things I can do? Some more things I can do. So it's not enough just to sort of take that teaching in and say, yeah, I think that's right. yeah, Buddha was right. We need to give up clinging. But in my everyday life, I'm still going along doing whatever I was doing before. That's kind of a disconnect, right? It's got to really get in here, and we need to look carefully at our intention. So just saying, yeah, Buddha's right, is not necessarily the same as having a real intention and actually enacting that intention to carry that out by investigating desire, by investigating suffering. How does desire arise? How does it keep us trapped up? How does it keep us bound up? What's the dynamic there? You know, what does that look like here, not just here? What does it actually look like in my moment-by-moment experience? What's arising? Is it wholesome? Is it not wholesome? What am I doing with that? What's the result of what I'm doing with that? That's not easy. That's not comfortable, right? Our desires are kind of comfortable. I want more ice cream. I go to the freezer. I get more ice cream. What if instead I go, wait a minute, do I really need that? Nobody wants to do that. Ice cream is lovely. We want all the ice cream we can get. So to really look carefully at suffering and desire and how it arises takes real courage, takes intention, takes diligence. And I think that's what Buddha's reminding us of here. He's not saying throw it all over and live in a cave. He's saying look very carefully, moment by moment, what's coming up and what are we doing with it. So the second of his intentions is the intention of goodwill, which of course counters ill will, hatred, anger, right? So when we're feeling angry and frustrated, it can feel mighty good to act that out somehow, to think we're releasing that tension. But of course we know there are likely to be unfortunate consequences to that action. So, acting out doesn't really allow us to release that feeling or let go of that feeling. It probably just embeds it more deeply in our habituated thinking, so that we recognize when I'm encountering something which is frustrating, this is what I do. And the more we do it, the more we do it, right? So again, okay, what's arising and what am I doing with that, and is it helpful? This teaching is not saying, by the way, that we should ignore angry feelings or suppress angry feelings, or that somehow we should not pay attention to them. That's not healthy. Nobody would say that was healthy. We also know if we ignore our feelings, they're going to leak out someplace, probably not some way that's under our control, probably some way that's passive aggressive or is creating additional suffering. So we might not be acknowledging angry, suffering, hatred feelings. That doesn't mean they're not there, right? And as human beings, they arise. We can't beat ourselves up for them. That doesn't make us bad practitioners that they arise. Our challenge is, what do we do with it? Do we look at it carefully? And do we see what we're doing with that? So turning that around so that we have goodwill or loving kindness for beings is not a matter of simply being sentimental, spouting the latest Hallmark greeting card phrase or something. It's not about feeling obligated to respond to people in a certain way. I'm going to stuff down my angry feelings in order to be what I think people want me to be, or to be what I think I should be, or something like that. It doesn't come from feelings of personal attachment, and that's the key thing, right? So this goodwill is not about, I love people because they are lovable. I love somebody because of who that person is. Or I'm looking for a good quality in somebody in order that I can love that person or have goodwill toward that person. That's still, here's the reference point. I. This is not about that. And this is not the way we typically approach our relationships, right? It's like, I want to get something back from you, even if that's a good feeling that I think you're attracted in some way. So this is a selfless kind of goodwill. Self is not the reference point. This is a goodwill that applies to everybody, no matter who that person is or what that being is. What a challenge, right? We got people in our lives, it's pretty tough to love them. Even sometimes ourselves, right? It's pretty tough even to love ourselves sometimes. So this is a matter of taking skillful action based on seeing what's actually happening. How suffering arises, how suffering unfolds, really understanding interconnectedness, really getting the hindrances out of the way so that wisdom and compassion arise naturally. And then we see there's a different quality to this kind of goodwill. This is not about, I love you because you're appealing. This is, I recognize that I'm already connected to you because of interconnectedness. How can I help but wish goodwill for you if we are not separate? It's really kind of turns that around. It's a really interesting kind of teaching. So if we've got our thinking in order, our intention in order, our discrimination in order, naturally we can say and do the right thing and not create harm, right? Not harbor ill will, because this is not based on self, not self-referential. So Buddha's third kind of intention is the intention of harmlessness, which counters harmfulness, counters unwholesomeness, right? So goodwill is about wishing happiness and well-being for others, and harmlessness is about having compassion for others and wishing for them to be free from suffering. We can certainly wish beings to be free from suffering, even if on a personal level there's animosity, right? You can think of the person that irritates you most in the world, and it doesn't cost you anything to wish that person well. Wish that that person not have suffering. You're not giving anything up. You're not saying they're right. You're not endorsing toxic action. You're simply saying, I'm opening my being, this gate of interconnectedness, and wishing this person not to have suffering. It's a wonderful exercise in breaking that resistance, right? That constriction, contraction. So in both cases, we can put ourselves in the position of other beings. We can understand that everybody, including ourselves, wants to be happy and well and free from suffering. This is something we have in common, even with the person that irritates us the most in the world. We all want to be free from suffering. We all want to have compassion shown towards us, right? We all want to be free from harm. So understanding the Four Noble Truths is central to this gate. It's central to right intention. When we understand the nature of suffering in our own lives, then this intention of renunciation arises. If I understand the greed, clinging, thirsting desire is causing my suffering, naturally, I want to let go of that. Naturally, I want to work on grasping, craving, clinging because it's causing suffering. So this renunciation naturally arises. When we understand Four Noble Truths with relation to other beings, then naturally this intention of goodwill and this intention of harmlessness also arise. We're already connected. Why would we inject poison into that connection? It doesn't make sense. Of course, we would wish goodwill and non-suffering for the entire network. Why would we not do that? So working for these three positive things is said to dislodge thoughts about the three negative things and uproot the three poisons. So if we're working for renunciation and goodwill and harmlessness, we're naturally uprooting the three poisons: greed, anger, and ignorance. And we can start to shift our habituated thinking away from the kind of unskillful thinking habits that we might have, unskillful responses to the things that we encounter moment by moment, and toward our intention to be free from greed, anger, and ignorance. So we're back to intention. So again, right discrimination is a gate of Dharma illumination, for with it we eliminate all discrimination and lack of discrimination. So now we're going to Dogen. So here's what Dogen has to say about this second item on the Eightfold Path. Okay, where did he go? There it is. Okay, right thinking is a branch of the path. When we establish this thinking, the Buddhas of the 10 Directions all appear. So the manifestation of the 10 Directions and the manifestation of the Buddhas are just the time of the establishment of this concrete thinking. When we establish this concrete thinking, we are beyond self and transcending the external world. At the same time, in the very moment of the present, on thinking concrete facts, we go straight to Varanasi. The place where the thinking exists is Varanasi. An internal Buddha says, I am thinking the concrete state of not thinking. How can the state of not thinking be thought? It is different from thinking. This is right consideration or right thinking. To break a zafu is right thinking. So probably you've picked up on some familiar Dogen patterns here, as well as the well-known koan to which he's making reference. So there's lots of allusions here to other things, to other stories. We'll take that apart in a moment. That's always fun, for our mental gymnastics. But whatever else he's talking about, Dogen is always trying to get us to let go of our usual systems of thinking and analyzing, right? In this case, he's actually talking about thinking, but when he's talking about mountains or okesa or rice bowls or fences, tiles, pebbles, walls, whatever he's talking about, the goal is always exploding our habituated thinking. This is one of the reasons he's hard to read. He doesn't say anything like what we expect, because that's the point. He's trying to explode that thing. So, we're always talking about Dogen's teachings. He's not actually trying to teach us anything. I think he's trying to pry our desperate fingers, off of the clinging to what we think we know. He keeps poking at us to say, let go of that thing, and then let go of that thing, and then let go of that thing. So in this comment, he starts by telling us what happens when we engage in right thinking. And then he goes on to say something about what right thinking maybe actually is. So, right thinking is a branch of the path. So the words he's using here for thinking are broader than what thinking usually means in English. So they include wishing, hoping, reflecting, pondering, right? And that gets added to the original Sanskrit, from which this word derives, that has some sense of direction or purpose. So we're back to this kind of intention, right? So this covers both a general kind of considering, pondering, reflecting, and also a more specific coming to conclusion. So all the ways our brains typically operate are tied up here. So as we've said, right view is a clear perception of what's happening. Right discrimination or right thinking turns that into action. So we've got this broad perception, and then we've also got some kind of direction, some kind of conclusion. Okay, when we establish this thinking, the Buddhas of the 10 Directions all appear. So the manifestation of the 10 Directions and the manifestation of the Buddhas are just the time of the establishment of this concrete thinking. So 10 Directions, we encounter this all the time in this tradition. So the usual north, south, east, west, and the intermediate directions, northeast and southeast and all that, and up and down. So 10 directions, which is another way to say all the space, everything there is. So it's Buddhist shorthand for like all the space in the universe. So tradition says that each direction has its own Buddha, and each direction has its own Buddha land. So each of these Buddhas has a particular name, each one has a particular Dharma position, like virtue of goodness, or without lament, or offering treasures, or something, right? So we've got 10 directions, each one's got a Buddha land, each one's got its own Buddha. So Buddhism the 10 Directions is familiar because at the end of chanting a text, we always say all Buddhas 10 directions 3 times, da, 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 da. So we're like invoking that 2 and 3 and 4 times. We're about to do it again in the World Peace Ceremony. We're invoking this all the time. So we're invoking all the Buddhas everywhere in space and time when we do that. So Dogen wrote a whole fascicle of Shobogenzo about the 10 directions. And in Uji, he talks about time. In Jippo, he talks about 10 directions or space. So these two things are completely interpenetrated, time and space. That's another talk. We don't have time for that today. So Dogen says in this comment that when we establish right thinking or right intention, at that moment, everything in the universe appears as Buddha or appears as awakening. So this phrase, concrete thinking, I think is really interesting. What on earth? Concrete thinking. So I have a speculation about what he's pointing to, and then you can decide, you can say at the end whether you have another idea, or you think this is where he's actually going. I think concrete thinking means Zazen. Our everyday thinking is about our ideas and our stories and our conclusions. It's real in that there's nothing outside of Buddha's way, or nothing outside of this one unified reality. So it's not that our thinking isn't real. It's not that our thoughts and stories aren't real. But it's also just our picture of what's happening. You know, Hojo-san sometimes says, like, it's the map. The map isn't the same as the terrain. It's a picture of the terrain. So our ideas and our thoughts are like that. They're real, but they're our picture of something. But Zazen is a physical activity, which is carried out with this body. So it's a concrete manifestation of something, awakening or suchness or something, right? So we let go of everyday habituated thinking in Zazen. So Zazen is not based on that. It's not based on our ideas and conclusions and stories. It's a concrete form of opening the hand of thought. Because what are we doing? We're sitting there, thoughts are coming, we're not grabbing them, they're passing through, we're opening the hand of thought. You can't see somebody, I mean, it's a nice metaphor, I love the metaphor, opening the hand of thought. You can't see that. You can see somebody sitting Zazen. It's a concrete manifestation of this awakening we call opening the hand of thought. So if that's true, then Dogen is saying that everything manifests as its true nature, or as awakening, when we sit Zazen. So this is realizing, making something real. Right? Realization, making something real. When we establish this concrete thinking, we are beyond self and transcending the external world. So in this moment of establishing right thinking, or in the moment of sitting Zazen, we drop off body and mind. Dogen says, Shinji Datsuraku, dropping off body and mind. So in other words, we go beyond separation into self and other. There's no internal and external world. There's no boundary. There's no barrier. There's just sitting. Right? So we are, we are taking this form, but in a way there's no us, right? There's no me sitting Zazen, there's just Zazen happening. So at that point, where's the boundary? Where's the inside and outside? Where's the self and other? Where's the internal and the external world? Right? So yes, they're there, we're here, we don't disappear, we don't shut off our brains, our personalities don't go away, and also, where's the boundary? So we get to hold both of these truths. Right? At the same time. At the same time, in the very moment of the present, on thinking concrete facts, we go straight to Varanasi. The place where the thinking exists is Varanasi. So Varanasi, of course, was where Buddha first began teaching. So in our meal chant, we say, Buddha was born in Kapilavastu, enlightened in Magadha, taught in Varanasi, entered Nirvana in Kushinagata. So that's where he first started preaching the Dharma. So as soon as we sit Zazen and we establish right thinking, we go straight to where Buddha is preaching the Dharma. That's what he said. And we go there in this very moment of the present, even though Buddha lived 2,500 years ago, and Varanasi is halfway across the world. In this very moment of the present, we go straight to where Buddha is preaching the Dharma. Isn't that interesting? So we aren't separate from the time and space of the Buddha. And we see his Dharma continuing to unfold right here and now. So we are not disconnected from Buddha 2,500 years ago in Varanasi preaching the Dharma. Had he not done that, we would not be here doing this, right? There's a very direct connection. So his Dharma is still unfolding. His life is still unfolding in that way. So in this very place where we're doing our thinking is Varanasi. This very place where we're doing our concrete thinking, our Zazen, is where Buddha's preaching. Or as the Platform Sutra says, no thought is to see and know all things with a mind free from attachment. When in use, it pervades everywhere, yet it sticks nowhere. So Dogen goes on, an eternal Buddha says, I am thinking the concrete state of not thinking. How can the state of not thinking be thought? It is different from thinking. This is right consideration, right thinking. To break a zafu is right thinking. So Dogen, of course, is recalling a famous koan story about Yakusan Igen, or in Chinese Yaoshan, you might know him as Yaoshan. Talks about this story in other places in the Shobogenzo. This was a story he liked a lot because it shows up in several places in Dogen's writing. He says the activity of every Buddha is based on non-thinking. So this is a really important point for him. We're about to talk about non-thinking. You probably didn't know that. Probably could have guessed. So he calls Yakusan an eternal Buddha, which for him that's a lot of respect coming from Dogen. He calls somebody an eternal Buddha. So he's just spent several sentences talking about how we should establish right thinking. And suddenly Dogen seems to be saying non-thinking is what we really ought to be doing. So how do we reconcile these two things? You know, he's just said we need to establish this concrete right thinking. And then he turns right around and says, and by the way, it's non-thinking we ought to be doing. So, frequent Dogen tactic, right? This is what he does, rapidly shifting from one point of view to another, sometimes within the same sentence even. And again, he's trying to shake us up. He's trying to not let us land anywhere and get complacent and think we know and use a lot of this, right? He's constantly trying to explode that thinking. So the full story of this koan that he's talking about is, when Yakusan was sitting in Zazen, a monk asked, what do you think about sitting in steadfast composure? Yakusan said, I think not thinking. The monk said, how do you think not thinking? And Yaoshan said, non-thinking. Yakusan or Yaoshan said, non-thinking. So Yakusan is an important ancestor for us. His teacher was Sekito Kisen. You may know Sekito Kisen. He wrote the Sandokai, or the merging of difference and sameness. In our full-bore formal morning service, every other day we chant the Sandokai, chant the whole Sandokai. So that's an important teaching for us. So Yakusan's student was Ungan Donjo, and Ungan's student was Tozan Ryokai, one of the founders of Soto's school. So this is a very direct connection for us. He's an important ancestor for us. So it's probably not a coincidence, I think, that this exchange is happening while Yakusan is sitting in Zazen. So in Zazen, we let go of habituated thinking. So of course that doesn't mean we don't think. In this human form, our karma is that brain makes thought, right? So we have all kinds of karmic seeds already planted from our whole lives of experience and taking things in and all of that. So of course it results in thoughts coming up. We have memories and habits and fears and plans and all the things that our brain does. You know, if our brain's not making thoughts, it probably means there's something seriously wrong or we're no longer alive. So of course, you know, one of the first things we learn from whoever teaches us Zazen is that there is no goal about not thinking. It would be easy to decide that, well, I'm sitting in front of this wall, I should not be thinking. Not possible in this human form, so we can check that off, right? We don't need to put time there. Okay, so Hojo-san says, when we are sitting, we do not follow our thoughts, nor do we stop them. We just let them come and go freely. We cannot call it thinking because the thoughts are not grasped. If we simply peruse our thoughts, it is just thinking, it is not Zazen. We cannot call Zazen not thinking either because thoughts are coming and going like clouds floating in the sky. When we are sitting, our brain does not stop functioning, just as our stomach is always digesting. Sometimes our minds are busy, sometimes our minds are calm. Just sitting without being concerned with the conditions of our minds is the most important point in Zazen. When we sit in this way, we are one with reality, which is beyond thinking. To say it another way, reality manifests itself through our body and mind. So here we are again, right? No separation. Reality manifests itself through our body and mind. So thoughts are coming up even in Zazen. And as I say, there is no goal in Zazen about stopping our thinking, even if that was possible. But we're doing something other than thinking. Thoughts are coming up, but we're doing something other than thinking, which is interesting. So how do we even consider what that means? So we're going beyond thinking to non-thinking. Non-thinking and not thinking are not the same thing. So we're dropping the separation between me as a subject and my thought as an object, right? So I'm not grasping that thought, I'm not engaging with that thought, I'm not making a judgment about it, I'm not getting on the train with it and riding out of town. Thought's coming up, but it's not me having a thought. There is just thinking happening. Just like there's no me doing Zazen, there is Zazen happening. So we're just letting the universe do what it does without putting a layer on top of that that says there's a me thinking this thought. So if there's no subject and object, then there is just complete functioning. There is just total dynamic functioning. And that is non-thinking, right? So non-thinking is not about the absence of thought. It doesn't mean we stop thinking. It doesn't mean there's no thinking. It means there's no me doing something called thinking. There's no me doing something called having a thought. So Hojo-san and Uchiha Roshi always use the analogy of putting a car in neutral. You've probably heard this from one or the other of them, either in the books, in the writings, or in the talks. The engine is running, but the car isn't going anywhere. So this non-thinking isn't intellectual. It's not something that's happening in subconscious. It's something different. There's no sort of self-reference point. Again, we're back to that same kind of thing, right? So non-thinking is where we don't cling to either this linear, sequential thinking. It's also not that there's just blank, but there's just nothingness, which kind of is impossible for us. We're not trying to leave the everyday world of things and activities and responsibilities and families and jobs, but we're not getting stuck there either, right? So we're not trying to force anything. Because if we're trying to force something, that's just another story. That's just another idea. If I'm trying to force myself into non-thinking or something, force myself into non-separation, it's like that's just another idea about what's going on or about who I am as a practitioner. So, if we get caught up with that, we really can't do non-thinking. We really can't see reality for what it is because we're imposing another idea about that. So Kodo Sawaki says, in Zazen, the residue does not remain even in the occurrence of thought or in the hearing of sounds. Sounds are simply heard and thoughts simply occur, and then they naturally disappear, just like the incoming and outgoing of breath. So in other words, non-thinking, those experiences don't become seeds that become the basis of new thoughts. So thoughts come up and we grab them and that just plants them again, and then we have another thought about having the thought, and right, we have this chain. So if we're doing if non-thinking is what's happening, we're not grabbing those things and planting them. We're not using that as a start to the chain. Things are just coming and going. So we're not sort of grabbing them, processing, coming to conclusions about them. We're not holding up a yardstick and making a judgment or making a measurement. We're also not pushing them away. We're not suppressing those thoughts, wishing they weren't there. They're just passing through in and out like breathing. Breathing feels very natural, right? We can't not do breathing. Air comes in, air goes out. Thoughts are like that. They arise and then they go out. So it feels quite natural. It doesn't feel forced. We're not pushing them away. We're not grabbing them. We're not making something out of them. It's just this very natural functioning. So in Zazen, we can let go of our dualistic ideas, and that's when the Buddhas of the 10 Directions appear and manifest, right in the midst of non-thinking. So Zazen is where we can really experience what Dogen is talking about in this comment. I think this is why he says we need to break the zafu. Or another translation says wear out the cushion. A little less poetic maybe, wear out the cushion, right? With our Zazen, with our sitting. We need to completely, wholeheartedly sit, throwing away separation, dropping off body and mind. So Dogen's comment, now that we've taken it apart, Dogen's comment altogether once again. Right thinking is a branch of the path. When we establish this thinking, the Buddhas of the 10 Directions all appear. So the manifestation of the 10 Directions and the manifestation of the Buddhas are just the time of the establishment of this concrete thinking. When we establish this concrete thinking, we are beyond self and transcending the external world. At the same time, at the very moment of the present, on thinking concrete facts, we go straight to Varanasi. The place where the thinking exists is Varanasi. An eternal Buddha says, I am thinking the concrete state of not thinking. How can the state of not thinking be thought? It is different from thinking. This is right consideration or right thinking. To break a zafu is right thinking. So this is the same thing, I think, as our gate statement is saying. Right discrimination is a gate of Dharma illumination, for with it we eliminate all discrimination and lack of discrimination. So we're going beyond distinction, even, between discrimination and not discrimination. So it's a bit of a conundrum, right? This gate it kind of doesn't tell us what right discrimination or right thinking itself is. It just says right thinking is eliminating the difference between thinking and not thinking. So it's this interesting kind of conundrum he sets up. It doesn't say that thinking and not thinking don't exist. It says there's something bigger than that distinction. So there is thinking, there is not thinking, and there's going beyond thinking and not thinking. All of these things are true, right? But he's never actually saying what thinking is. He just says, go beyond the distinction. So there's form and emptiness, and go beyond the distinction. This is what he does. So this is why there's no yardstick for Zazen, I think, right? Because Zazen is a concrete manifestation of going beyond discrimination. So as soon as non-thinking is happening, there aren't any categories like delusion and enlightenment, and good and bad, and self and other, and all that stuff. There's just suchness. There's just emptiness. There's just functioning, right? So the irony is that in order to carry out this right intention, we have to let go of any distinction between right intention and harmful intention. In order to do this properly, we have to let go of our ideas about what it is. So in order to experience right discrimination, or right thinking as a Dharma gate, we have to let go of the Dharma gate. So there's our challenge, right? How do we do this? By letting go of it. This is classic Dogen, I think. What would you all like to say about right discrimination, right thought, right intention, anything we brought up today? And for folks at home, the computer is on in that corner. I can't see you well enough to call on you. So when you have something to say, you're going to need to just speak up.
Can somebody get it so that...
Well, I don't need to see. They can just speak to me. So do people have things to say, reflections to offer here or at home? Please, Sawyer.
Yeah, I think I have two questions.
Okay.
And one is about renunciation and one is about Zazen. So maybe it's one question, but
non-separation. All questions are the same, please.
but we'll see if I get to the second one. I might want to give space, but living within a society of where it's the circumstances of many to be among abundance, to have access to so much in terms of resources, property, the ability to own. And I'm thinking of Hoshin's talk too, the mess I own. So for so many of us, we have to navigate how to deal with the mess that we own. And I can understand how renunciation, sort of not owning things, simplifies what our practice could be. It sort of makes it simpler to care for the small things that just our body, our robes. But if you have to care for more, it becomes that much more complicated. So I wonder, how do you care for is that a good metaphor or a good way of thinking about it?
Sure.
If you do have a lot, how do you care for it?
Sure. Oh, there are so many things to say about that. I mean, you hit a really interesting intersection. So I think what you're describing is exactly why householder practice is so much more difficult than monk practice. People think it's the other way around. People think, oh, monk practice, that's way harder. Not at all, in my experience. When I'm in a training temple in Japan, my life is very simple. I know exactly what I'm supposed to do. I have very little of my own to deal with. We do the same thing every day. Things are very clear. Responsibilities in that group are very clear. It can be physically demanding. It can certainly be mentally, psychologically demanding. But I think that's very different than householder practice for exactly the reasons you're talking about. Suddenly, we have to manage a lot of things. And it might be things we own, but it's responsibilities in society and responsibilities to our families and just all the things that we encounter, moving through the day. So, I think it's backwards if we think monk practice, whatever that is easy. It is harder. I think in many ways it's easier because there's a very specific container that's been created to allow us to live in a certain way. So, no matter how much we own or are responsible for, I think the main point is, what's our attitude toward that, and are we grasping and clinging or not? I think it's possible to own or be responsible for a whole lot, and to do that in a way which is not about thirsting desire, and is not about this as a reference point. And I think it takes us right back to our Bodhisattva vows. Beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Not possible, Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to go through them all. Well, if we own all that stuff, those are all Dharma gates, we can't go through them all. So, in a way, we can't possibly do all the things that we feel responsible for doing. And we could write a story about that, right? Am I not a martyred, wonderful practitioner because I've taken on all these responsibilities even though I'm working myself into the ground? I hope one of your Sangha brothers or sisters would come after you and say, do you see what you're doing here? It's all about ego, right? So yes, we have plenty to take care of. And as bodhisattvas, we agree to take that on and do the best we can to the best of our ability. We do the best we can with what we have and what we know at the time, is the phrase, right? And we can't do it all, right? So can we do it without clinging? Can we do it without getting stuck? It's a real challenge, because we get pulled in so many directions, right? And everybody else has expectations for us, let alone our own intention. So we take on the things that we need to take on in order to carry out our responsibilities in the world. At the same time, I think we can look at our lives with some intention and say, am I putting my energy, my effort, my gifts, my skills, my abilities in the most effective places? Because sometimes we get sucked into stuff that really isn't ours to do, right? And then, are we really being effective? How much can we actually take on? So we have to look carefully at resources and how much we can do. And resources includes, our health, our well-being, all of that. So I think the more we have, yes, it's more complicated. There are times where that's what we have to do, right? If I'm doing my Red Cross volunteer work and I'm running a warehouse, I've got a lot to take care of, but I've agreed to take that on as some kind of bodhisattva activity. Can I do that without getting stuck in my idea about what does it mean for me to run this warehouse and get these supplies out to the refugees, right? Because it would be easy for me to say, boy, I'm hot stuff, look at all this stuff I'm running. I'm gonna take on more stuff because, it feeds my ego. I'm gonna rise higher and higher in my corporate life, or I'm gonna have more and more employees or more clients or something. Maybe I'm having more and more clients because I'm going to help more people. Maybe it's because I think I need that for my picture of whatever it is I'm doing, right? So, it's good to simplify, but there are times we can't. And that's what it is to be a bodhisattva, Mark's running the whole department. He can't probably, jettison half of that thing. He's got to run what he's got and do the best he can with it. And it's not easy, I'm sure. And yet he can do that. I hope he's doing that. He can do that in a bodhisattva way, which says, I will do the most good, for the most people that I can, and I'll know where the boundary is. Do you want to follow up on any of that? And did you have a Zazen question as well, or have we?
Yeah, well, maybe it would go in a different direction, very different direction, so I'll just.
You give somebody else a chance and we'll come back to you? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, no, I think since you brought up Mark, he should have an opportunity to respond.
Anything you want to say about that, Mark?
Well, I'm not running it entirely by myself, but there's one other colleague that I'm running it with, who incidentally happens to be a bodhisattva who practices in the Tibetan tradition. So being able to have these conversations are things that are pretty helpful. But it's one of those things, since we're talking about that world right now, anyone who's affiliated with the university probably sees that the staff shortages that are affecting everyone else in the world are affecting the university as well. And so we're reliant on far fewer advisors, far fewer different people, but the expectations are still greater. And every single day that I try to approach work in a wholesome way, and trying to do so in a bodhisattva way, I know that I am making a lot of falling short in a lot of those different areas just because that greed, anger, and ignorance that, you know, I spent 50 minutes just staring at it's almost like sometimes so instinctive. And so this is one of those things is that the things that I might be dealing with from that point, things that I might be angry about or things that I might necessarily not be approaching in the most wholesome way possible, it's something that is very evident to me, you know, when you're letting go of thought and you're just kind of seeing these thoughts come and go and come and go and come and go. But then I have also a temptation to like, now I'm away from the cushion, I'm at my job or I'm at home, and I want to sort all these thoughts out in my head so I can see how better I can do. But the more that I'm planting those seeds, those thoughts keep regenerating and regenerating and regenerating in ways that I clearly see myself like telling a story, and no matter how much I recognize that I'm telling a story about it, telling myself a story about it, I keep telling myself a story about it, right? And so it's yeah, like inexhaustible doesn't even get to the doesn't even get to the root of it.
Oh, that's the human condition, right? Yeah. Well, and of course it would be easy. It would be, in some ways, it would be easier to give it all up and go live in the cave, right? And you know, very clearly, Buddha's not saying we ought to be doing that because we can't escape our responsibilities. That's what it is to be a bodhisattva, right? If we were not being bodhisattvas, we would work for our own salvation, our own liberation. We would leap free of this wheel, this world of samsara. We would go to nirvana and be, you know, happily ever after. And as bodhisattvas, we can't, right? So if we end up owning things, running things, being responsible for things, that is our bodhisattva practice. So maybe for ourselves, we'd like to escape. There's no escape. Right? So, what would others like to say? Here or at home? Questions, reflections? Hoshin?
Yes. This is such a huge gate. It encompasses a lot. You said a lot of things that I've always wanted to clarify, and maybe it connects with this gate or not, but I think I can make it there. You said concrete thinking is Zazen?
Well, that's what that's my conclusion.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm okay with that. I mean, language is
tough.
slippery.
Yes, it is.
Every time you make a word about something, it creates an idea that you need to clarify somehow. So I guess I would think that is the exact opposite of what I think Zazen is.
Okay.
So, it's just the fact that concrete lacks fluidity.
Yes.
When I sit, it's the thinking and letting go. It seems like a completely fluid process. So that's just me.
Well, and I think that's right. And so I have to say, the first time I read that comment, I thought, concrete thinking. It's like, why concrete?
Well, that's a translation from what?
Yeah, it is a translation. And I have to say, I didn't go back and look at the original word, but when I looked at it, I thought, why concrete? So what is it about the concrete? Because he's just, you know, at the same time that he's talking about concrete thinking, he's saying non-thinking, no separation, everything's moving, right? Was it the translator or another author, had some suggestion that the state of mind he was talking about was something that happened in Zazen. And I thought about that, and I thought, well, I think where he's going is realization. How do we make it real? We can't see somebody, you know, we can't see non-thinking. So how do we like manifest what's going on here with the body? So I took it in that direction. I think what he's talking about is how do we make real? How do we realize? How do we manifest this non-thinking? Because he's saying as soon as we sit Zazen, Buddhas appear. You know, an awakening appears. So to take this physical form, this is maybe the physical form of that. So concrete is a tricky word, and I agree with you that, you know, usually we would never apply a word like concrete to Zazen, because that's exactly what we're trying to break out of, right? This really stuck, habituated, frozen, rigid kind of, you know. So it might be that was one of those things he's trying to get us to kind of explode.
Right.
You know,
Well,
so I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's a strange word, and I think maybe the strangeness was intentional.
Yeah.
But I don't know. So by concrete, I think he's talking about form as opposed to suchness.
Well, I mean, words have meaning and context, and often in philosophy, we'll talk about a concrete idea in contradistinction to an abstraction.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
the abstraction doesn't have anything to do with anything in particular.
Yep.
It's just an idea out there, maybe in some platonic form, or a concrete experience is how I actually feel in this very moment.
I think so.
So that's probably the context.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what we're
That's a good clarification.
So we need to not get stuck on this word concrete because it seems to not fit. And I think that not fittingness is part of the point.
Right.
But I don't know that.
Right.
So
Sure.
I cut you off. You had some other things to say.
Oh, and yeah, and I wanted to bring up something else that's still connected to the talk. I mean, and I can't help this. I mean, when I go to karma, the word karma, it's a sticky, difficult thing. And so just to put it out there.
Yes.
And to see how you'll respond.
Oh, he's putting me on the spot, man.
Yeah.
What are Dharma Brothers for?
Sort of like the mechanism of karma. Does one create karma or does karma create one?
Yes.
Okay. I'm with you.
Completely interdependent. Right?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, so this is the cycle I think that we're trying to explode. You know, we have these thoughts and experiences that get embedded in the eye consciousness. They express themselves through our thinking.
Mm-hmm.
We grab the thinking, we replant it, we act a certain way, we have a certain worldview, which creates more experiences, which get planted, and so there's this thing, right? It goes on and on and on and on and on. So in Zazen, with our non-thinking, or with non-thinking happening, I need to not put a subject on. With non-thinking happening, right, we're not planting anything. We're not grabbing any of that. We're not drawing conclusions, holding up yardsticks. So it's like we're not replanting it. It's going, and we are not creating the karma that keeps five skandhas attached to five skandhas. I think we're coming right back to five skandhas grabbing five skandhas, which Bodhisattva's always talking about, right? We have five skandhas. We have a heap of stuff that's clinging to itself. It's like, how is that even possible? There's some kind of gravity there that's holding it all together, and I think that's exactly what you're describing, right? You plant these seeds and it just kind of keeps holding this thing together. So what happens if those thoughts are coming and going and we're not replanting them? Eventually karma plays itself out. I mean, Buddha had his awakening experience and he didn't vanish into thin air. He still had karma to play out in this human form until he was 80 years old and died. Right? So he didn't go up in a puff of smoke. Even though he wasn't necessarily creating more, there was stuff that still had to play out. So will that happen for any of us? I don't know. But I think you're absolutely right. I think both are true.
Yeah.
You got other stuff to throw at me?
Well, I was just going to add a little bit to that. I almost want to present it as there are two kinds of karma. As the kind that, started with the Big Bang and is just a continuation of one form into another form into another form. And then there is this kind of karma that is manufactured by, and I want to use this term again because I like it, our own bureaucracy of ego.
So yes, and also those two things aren't separate, right?
Right.
I mean,
That's right.
karma led to me in this form. My ancestor got on the boat from Greece and came here, and so I'm here. That's not my karma, but it's my karma, right? So in a way, universe is doing what the universe does. It's playing itself out through us. So, we're here because certain causes and conditions led us to being here, and then we take certain action, which continues to play out, right? So there is this kind of personal karma, but there's also, what's much bigger than that. The universe simply doing what the universe does.
So, strictly speaking,
Please.
karma is defined as intentional action. So the Big Bang would not be karma.
Causes and conditions is not karma. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you for that. It's good to have a resident scholar to pull us back from the brink. Okay. Other things from people, other things from you, Doju, or from anybody?
Yeah.
Mark,
actually,
please.
oh, sorry. Mark, go ahead. I'll go next.
It seems like at the beginning of the very statement, we have discrimination with a self. At the very end of the statement, we have discrimination without a self.
Interesting.
And I find this problematic because I can't think of an intention or discrimination without a self.
Mhm. So I think this statement doesn't negate self. It says self is not the whole story. It doesn't negate that there's a human person taking action, right? But it says it is possible to go beyond discrimination and lack of discrimination. So it's possible to drop off body and mind, but it doesn't negate that there's a self.
Yeah, but you're just replacing self with a different self. You're replacing small self with a larger self.
Well, or they function together. It's not one or the other.
Okay.
He's taking me off the hook. Doji, what did you want to add?
So for me, right intention has always been kind of one of the trickier of the, Eightfold Noble Path. It's always been a little bit vague to me. So I found this very helpful to kind of hear how Dogen looked at it and equated it with right, his thinking, not thinking thing. But what I wanted to just sort of say was, there's some interesting linguistic stuff I think going on. So looking at the gate statement for today, let me see where I have it here. So first of all, like when you said this right discrimination, I was like, that doesn't sound like, the second of the Eightfold Noble Path. Because normally we don't hear it that way. And it seems that the standard way that it's rendered in Chinese and Japanese is not that way. That's like sort of an unusual usage. It seems that the normal Chinese Japanese way is basically like right thinking rather than right discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Sanskrit and Pali seems to be more like right intention. Although that word seems very multivalent, but it seemed like, for example, when I looked it up in the dictionary, that there's in modern Hindi, they'll speak of like a New Year's resolution, and they use that same
Interesting.
samyak samkalpa, which is that term. So it sort of crosses over into vow as well, which I find interesting. So it seems like there's all this stuff going on, and it seems like in the Chinese East Asian tradition, they sort of picked out this sort of more thinking discrimination version of it, but in the original tradition, it might have had more of a sense of kind of action and vow. So I just was sort of curious what you thought about all of that.
Well, I think you're right, and I didn't go deeply into that. Part of my brain was saying, maybe Dojo will be there and we'll talk about that. So I didn't go deeply into that, but that's why in the beginning I kind of mentioned, this translation uses right discrimination, and one of the first things I said was you might know this element is right thought or right intention, because it's kind of unusual. So I did, I went with what the translation said, but I pretty quickly dropped the word discrimination, because that felt kind of weird to me. I think this is one of those cases where I had to say, we're going to have to think about like why there's all of these translations is the wrong word, but why all of these words kind of come together in this, in this one element. So I think for me the key is this idea or this teaching about moving from what do I perceive or what do I understand toward what do I want to do with that? What action do I want to take about that? So there is a thinking element that says, I ponder, I reflect, I come to some conclusion, and then there's also the directional piece, which says, what's my intention? How do I understand what's happening, and then how do I respond to that? How do I intend to respond to that? Right. So I think both of those, that intersection of those two things is kind of interesting. It's helpful that, Doji was able to point out, like, why are they all mashed up in there? Because just as you mentioned there, Doji, we've got the Sanskrit, we've got the Chinese, we've got the Japanese, and we've got Dogen weighing in. So we're moving across space and across time, and of course these things change. So I tend to like to go back to the origins of some of these words just to say, what's the background? Buddha says there's 3 kinds of intention. Okay, it's helpful to know that, Anyway, of course, these things predate Dogen, and he's talking about things that came before. So there's shifts across time and space. I think that intersection of thinking and intention, though, is interesting and important. So thank you for providing us the linguistic background there. It's good to have a resident scholar to pull those pieces out. Are there other things you wanted to add in there, Doju?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I guess the only other thing of note that I saw was that this character, so I think in the translation it said eliminate discrimination and non-discrimination, as the result of right discrimination. But the character used there for eliminate is again this sever or cut off, which I think is a little more kind of vital than compared to eliminate. So it's
Right.
It sort of suggests more this idea of going beyond.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's right. I think it's important. Yep. Good. Okay. Anything else people would like to say or ask this morning?
Hey, Hoko, this is Pusats. Thanks so much, and Sawyer, thanks so much. I can't see you, but I'm always appreciative of your comments. One of the things that came up for me when you were speaking about, the Dharma, and monastic versus in a lay practice is the culmination of those two and how beneficial they are for each other. As lay practitioners in the communities and in our jobs and in our lives, I think it's really important to see how the Dharma, you work with that as things arises. And yeah, it's a lot and can be complex when we're dealing with so much stuff in the world. But I think it's so very helpful to have practitioners that are working with these principles and being mindful of things as they are working through these, because I think that brings back, things that we can work with and talk about, with our other lay practitioners, and also with people like Hoko and Doju and Hoshin that are able to really can marinate in the teachings, and I think that's going to create a benefit for the future and how we work with this in the lay world. So I really appreciate those comments and the activities that arise from being able to work with practice and intentionality too. So thank you for everyone's comments there.
Very good. Okay. Thank you. Anything else this morning, or shall we move on to World Peace Ceremony? We still have that to do. We good for now?
The world certainly needs it.
The world certainly needs it. So let's go do that. All right. Thank you very much.